Welcome to today's meeting of the Commonwealth Club of California. I'm Jerry Siebert, your quarterly chair. I'd also like to welcome the listeners of WDPS-FM in Dayton, Ohio, one of the over 200 radio stations nationwide carrying America's longest-running radio program. It is my pleasure to extend to all of our listeners across the United States an invitation to join us at the Commonwealth Club of California whenever they are visiting San Francisco. And now, today's speaker. It is a pleasure to welcome back Joseph McNamara, who has addressed the Commonwealth Club of California previously in 1985, 1987, and 1989 as police chief for San Jose, a position to which he was appointed in 1976. He retired as police chief in 1991 and is currently a research fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford. He has been police chief for San Jose for 15 years and is recognized as an expert in criminal justice, police technology and management systems, crime prevention, and international drug control policies. His law enforcement career spans a 35-year period, which began a beat patrolman for the New York City Police Department. In mid-career, he was appointed a criminal justice fellow at Harvard Law School, focusing on criminal justice research methodology. Following this appointment, he took a leave of absence and obtained a doctorate in public administration at Harvard. After his return to New York City, he's appointed deputy director in charge of crime analysis and in 1973, police chief of Kansas City, Missouri. During his tenure in San Jose, the city became the safest city in the United States despite the lowest staffing per capita. The San Jose police became a model for innovation, community relations, and productivity. He has served as instructor and adjunct professor at 4 different colleges and has lectured at many top universities, including Harvard, Stanford, and Berkeley. He has served as consultant to many public agencies and corporations and has appeared on numerous radio and television programs. He currently serves as commentator for public broadcasting radio. He has written 4 books and a crime prevention text. Included in his published writings is a long list of newspaper articles. Please join me in welcoming Joseph McNamara, whose topic, the Los Angeles riots and crisis in American policing, could not be more timely.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be back at the Commonwealth Club, this wonderful forum. March 1991, Los Angeles. The California Highway Patrol advises their officers are in pursuit of a vehicle failing to yield southbound Paston and Foothill. Vehicle is a white Hyundai, license 2KFM 102. That message, broadcast at 12:47 a.m. on Sunday, March 3rd, 1991, by the Los Angeles Emergency Police Dispatcher, began one of the most disturbing episodes in the history of American policing. Moments later, the pursued vehicle left the freeway, and the Los Angeles police officers joined the chase. Within minutes, the vehicle, driven by Rodney King, Jr., an Afro-American, was stopped on Foothill Boulevard. Rodney King left his car, and George Holliday, a bystander with a video camera, recorded 4 Los Angeles police officers brutalizing Rodney King as some 20 other uniformed officers watched. The police behavior was confirmed by 3 other eyewitnesses, but it was the vivid pictures of Rodney King, unresisting and prone on the ground, being repeatedly kicked, hit with batons, and jolted by a taser gun that shocked and sickened people everywhere. Television showed us pictures that do not fit the image we have of American police officers. Mr. King was arrested and taken to the hospital with numerous injuries. The bones of his right eye socket were broken, and he suffered 11 broken bones at the base of his skull. The police joked about the beating on their radios and filed their reports. Rodney King's attorney prepared to file a complaint of brutality, and the police and legal bureaucracies proceeded at their usual pace until the videotape was shown on television the next day. The Rodney King incident and the subsequent riots are not things that can only happen in Los Angeles. The conditions that produced the police behavior and attempted cover-up and the subsequent riots are present in all large American cities. I believe we have not fully understood the magnitude of disillusionment with law the Rodney King incident caused, nor the ultimate impact it is likely to have upon race relations, crime, and the economy. Los Angeles during the riots was like a scene from Beirut. Widespread fires, shootings, assaults, and looting led to the loss of more than 50 lives and hundreds of millions of dollars in property. 8,000 troops were deployed before the disorder was finally brought under control. Unless policies are implemented to reverse present trends, the United States is likely to suffer such mini civil wars. As unthinkable as it is, the resulting instability will devastate this economy and cause a loss of capital and jobs to more stable areas such as Europe and Asia. And we know more poverty and joblessness can only increase crime and racial tension. Therefore, presidential candidates should specify now how they intend to deal with the increasing polarization of our country. What are the details of their national strategies to prevent crime and disorder? The thin blue line is faltering. The FBI Crime Index indicates that there were almost 15 million serious crimes committed in the United States during 1991, and almost 2 million of those crimes were violent. So far this year, there has been a sharp increase in both violent and nonviolent crime. The rate of violent crime is now the highest in 3 decades, and murder rates show that life is indeed cheap in the United States. On the average, an American is murdered every 20 minutes, and someone hit by gunfire every 16 seconds. In addition, emergency room statistics and surveys indicate an increase in the use of illegal drugs, despite claims from Washington that we are winning the war against drugs. At the same time, police forces across the country are suffering embarrassing disclosures. To name just a few, the mayor, the commander-in-chief of the police in Washington, D.C., was convicted of drug crimes by federal investigators after local officers were apparently ordered not to investigate. In Detroit, Michigan, and Rochester, New York, the police chiefs themselves were convicted of stealing confidential drug investigation funds. In San Francisco, the police chief had to be dismissed after it came to light that he had abused his authority by encouraging police officers to seize a newspaper containing an uncomplimentary picture of him. In Milwaukee, police officers responding to a call from citizens to assist a dazed and helpless young man took him back to the man who would kill him. The cops shrugged it off as a gay quarrel, thus allowing serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer to continue his grisly career of murder. In Dayton, Ohio, an officer in a neighborhood program aimed at drugs burned a teenage drug suspect with a hot iron. In Miami, Hispanics rioted when 6 narcotic officers accused of beating a drug dealer to death were acquitted. In Boston, the FBI released a report castigating the police for slanting evidence in the Stewart case. Detectives produced false evidence implicating black men in the murder of a white woman. In this highly publicized case, the woman's husband claimed she was murdered when their car broke down in a black neighborhood. It turned out that the husband had killed her, and the white detectives had been all too eager to gather phony evidence that would have convicted an innocent man. A commission investigating the Boston police sharply criticized the police chief for his out-of-control department and implied that the chief had been selected not for his management ability, but because of his long friendship with and loyalty to the mayor. Long Beach, California, a city of more than 400,000 people, is dissatisfied with its police department and considering disbanding it. Who will they hire? The Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, itself under investigation for corruption, brutality, and racism. This list of police departments in trouble is only a sample, but it shows a national pattern where even white citizens, let alone minorities, find it increasingly difficult to trust their police. How did we get to such a state, and what can be done about it? The malaise in policing reflects our society and our politics. The King incident reveals our differences: whites and minorities, haves and have-nots, suburbanites and city dwellers. We talk at each other, not to each other. Our words flash past the others, hissing through the air like rounds from military assault rifles. Most whites say, the police behavior on the King tape was wrong, and the jury verdict unfortunate, but these things happen. It does not justify rioting. Minorities say, how much can we put up with? Police brutality and racism, discrimination and poverty are constant, and they cause the riots. Whites say, people are accountable for what they do. We cannot allow looting, arson, and assault. We must respect the law. Minorities ask, who holds the cops and politicians accountable when they break the law? Why is it that so many minorities are sent to prison while whites escape justice? Why should we respect the law? Whites say, we did not move away from cities because we are racist. We moved because we are sick of crime and violence. Minorities say, we live more and more in two societies, separate and unequal. Whites say, throwing money at problems does not work. Look at the welfare system. Minorities will have to drag themselves up the economic ladder like the other minority groups did during our country's history. Minorities say, hold on. Whites have ruled America and created the conditions producing drugs, crime, and violence. You cannot walk away now and say it is our problem to solve. And so it goes. Group competition and hostility have always been part of American society, and the police have always been in the middle of this group conflict and always criticized for being part of the problem. Understanding what went wrong, however, is essential if we are to improve. Most whites, and indeed most police officers, do not realize that historically many complaints of discrimination against the police were justified. The first American police forces were established in the 1840s, when cities were controlled by corrupt political machines, interested in their own continued power and not police reform. Ironically, the first sustained police reform movement started in Los Angeles after the Second World War. In the 1950s, California did away with partisan local elections, and in Los Angeles, the police chief was, in effect, given lifetime tenure in office and independence from elected officials. This politically independent form of policing was thought necessary to prevent police corruption. But as recent events in Los Angeles have shown, the city paid a heavy price for violating a basic rule of democracy. The military and the police must be under civilian control. The Christopher Commission, appointed to investigate the Los Angeles Police Department after the King videotape, found institutionalized police racism and unnecessary use of force, covered up by a police code of silence and complicit police management. Both the police and those they served were dehumanized by the police culture. The Commission's findings vindicated years of complaints by the city's minorities and repudiated the denials of those complaints by the police chief and the police union. If the police are controlled by a heavy hand from City Hall, however, we get equally bad results. For example, years ago, when Officer Frank Serpico of the New York Police Department reported that some of his fellow vice officers were corrupt, one of the mayor's top assistants tried to squelch the investigation because the mayor was coming up for election and could not afford a fight with a powerful police union. The police department, with City Hall support, tried to suppress Serpico's complaint until media disclosure led to a scandal and appointment of an investigation commission. So in both Los Angeles and New York, the establishment, local elected officials, police brass, and the police unions fought against exposure and reform. It seems to me we have been both too demanding of our police and not demanding enough. We demand that they engage in wars to stop crime and drug use, when it is clear that such efforts do not work and alienate the minority community. And we do not demand enough when we tolerate conditions permitting racist, brutal, and unprofessional cops to remain on the police force. The police crime and drug abuse. For more than a decade, the United States has engaged in a highly publicized war on drugs. Police arrest rates are at an all-time high. Our courts inundated. Our jails and prisons let violent criminals out to make room for new arrivals. And our state and local governments are in fiscal crisis, closing schools and laying off teachers as we build more prisons, hire more police, judges, and correctional personnel. Yet, our crime rates are soaring and drug abuse is increasing, and the purchase of firearms continues at its frantic and destructive pace. Clearly, the law and order model has not lived up to the promises of our tough-talking politicians. For many years, our national policy said we cannot acknowledge that there are underlying causes of crime, because that would undermine the individual responsibility and sense of values needed in a democratic society. Law and order proponents pointed out that even in the poorest ghettos, many people do not commit crime. Therefore, there is no root cause of crime, arguing that people will not commit crimes if they fear being locked up. So we increased arrest, swamped the courts, and overburdened our prisons. Unfortunately, this economic rational behavior model does not explain why some people violate the law, especially those from the inner city. I spent the first 10 years of my police career in Harlem and saw a great deal of crime and violence, adding to the misery of people forced to live there because of the color of their skin. In one case, I arrested a burglar wrapped in stolen garments who fell from the top of an apartment building when the rope he used to lower himself into his victim's windows broke. Probably the most valuable thing he had taken was a bottle of old Granddad bourbon, which incredibly did not break during his 6th-floor fall. The burglar never regained consciousness and died a few days later. But to this day, the question one of his elderly victims asked sticks in my mind. "Officer," he said, "why did he steal from me? I don't have anything." Why indeed? Under the rational behavior model, in which the threat of incarceration looms large, the 45-year-old burglar would not have risked his life and freedom to go for so little gain. Nor would today's teenagers deal in dope and gunfire when such activity is likely to bring death or imprisonment before they reach the age of 20. But if that kind of behavior is all you see as a child, you are likely to act the same way. During my years in Harlem, I also helped 13 and 14-year-old girls into ambulances to take them to the hospital to have their first babies. Poor areas like Harlem, then and now, are denied the opportunities for birth control and abortion routinely available to the more affluent. You do not have to be a Harvard criminologist to know that the child being born to a teenage mother in Harlem is more likely to run the streets and get into gangs, crime, and drugs than the same child born in Scarsdale. I might mention that this sexual behavior was occurring long before the Murphy Brown television show was even a gleam in the eye of a producer. The truth America shrinks from is that although we cannot say that every child exposed to a slum environment turns into a criminal, The ones who do not are not, quote, normal among their peers. The proliferation of powerful firearms means, of course, that these children without hope have easy access to deadly weapons. Poverty, illegitimacy, illiteracy, welfare dependency, school failure, and discrimination may not cause everyone to commit crime, but they produce neighborhoods with such high levels of crime and violence that a cycle of failure and hopelessness is inevitable. The increased likelihood of arrest and imprisonment have not improved life in the slums, where the life expectancy has actually diminished as the drug war, police arrest, and imprisonment accelerated. The past decade has shown us that we need dramatic new ways to educate youngsters to help them develop a sense of right and wrong that creates respect for the rights of others. The criminal justice process is only effective when it reinforces society's values. Trying to understand why rioting, crime, and drug abuse occur does not mean that we excuse such behavior any more than a physician's attempt to understand the causes of disease indicates a lack of concern with the patient. The challenge is to make the values of inner city kids match those of more fortunate youngsters. It is not an easy task, but we know some things that do not work, and a few that show promise. One thing that does not work is bad policing. Let's talk about the causes and effects of bad policing. Paramilitary policing occurs when the police subculture is remote from the community. To give you an example, a woman approached me one day when I was on foot patrol in Harlem. "Excuse me, officer," she said. "I know you're busy." I was not at all busy. As I recall, I was standing there mentally lamenting the fact that my favorite baseball team was leaving the Polo Grounds to move to San Francisco. "I don't want to disturb you," the woman continued, "but I was just robbed." I remember wondering what kind of image we had with the people. But at the time, the police felt their job was to arrest criminals, and citizens got in the way. The New York Police Department even had a rule that members of the force were forbidden to engage in unnecessary conversation with the public. In other words, cops were busy looking for criminals and couldn't be bothered talking to people. Later research showed that without public cooperation in reporting crime and serving as witnesses, the police cannot be effective. But paramilitary policing never got that message. It never lived up to claims that tough, impersonal, arrest-happy cops reduce crime. On the contrary, crime increased in paramilitary Los Angeles and decreased under community-based policing in San Jose. Community-based policing may not have been the only factor leading San Jose to become the safest large city in America, but it helped. Under community policing, officers do more than just respond to calls and arrest lawbreakers. The cops meet with and work with neighborhood residents to prevent graffiti, clear abandoned cars from the streets, obtain needed streetlights, stop signs, and a variety of other amenities that make an area livable. In short, the police are part of a community trying to improve instead of aloof warriors against crime. The San Jose experience shows that significant reductions in crime are possible without resorting to paramilitary policing, which exacerbates racial tensions and increases the potential for Rodney King-type incidents and riots. Bad policing, such as we saw in Los Angeles, is easy to spot and difficult to prevent. People frequently ask why Daryl Gates has not been dismissed as police chief after accusations of insubordination, incompetence, and the lack of stability. The reason is that the Los Angeles Police Commission, which supervises the police department, is not sure that the Civil Service Commission would uphold its dismissal. Under civil service rules, Gates could appeal such a firing to the Civil Service Commission, causing a time-consuming, costly, and uncertain legal process. Now, Darrell Gates's behavior may make it hard to believe that he cannot easily be removed from office, yet it is even more difficult in most cities to fire rank-and-file officers. Most police scandals arise when bad cops go undisciplined and then get in worse trouble. This lack of discipline stems from a number of factors. For example, the mayor and members of the city council are usually anxious to be endorsed by the powerful police unions, which, like the National Rifle Association, are skilled in exploiting the fear of crime. Another factor is that one payback for political support is appointing people to civil service commissions who are sympathetic to employees brought up on charges. Commonly across the United States, civil service commissions overturn police discipline, even in cases of serious misconduct. When I was police chief, a number of San Jose politicians, in addition, motivated by self-interest, sided with the police union to limit management authority. Police chiefs are understandably cautious in bringing disciplinary actions that may not succeed, because they then get attacked by the police union and sued by the accused officers. As a consequence, too many people who are unfit to wear a badge escape discipline or are reinstated by civil service commissions. Fortunately, the overwhelming majority of officers are dedicated professionals who risk their lives daily to keep our communities safe. Unfortunately, the code of silence, which is nurtured by police unions and rarely acknowledged by police chiefs, is alive and well in every sizable police agency. As the Rodney King case made clear, the few bad cops are often protected by that code. Sadly, the corrupt, racist, or brutal minority do great damage to their victims, the community, and the reputation of their fellow cops. When I became police chief of San Jose, I found a Los Angeles-type department with a racist culture, a number of brutal officers, and a strong code of silence. Through the years, with the help of dedicated people in the police department, unfit officers were weeded out, and a community partnership model of policing gradually replaced the military model. But it was a close call. I received a vote of no confidence from the police union, which opposed every reform. My boss, the city manager, was fired, and the word was, I was next. There was a police strike and a campaign by the union to remove me as chief. I was spared only because the political power of the police union was broken when the council member whom the union supported for mayor was sent to prison for extortion relating to a zoning change. Cities need a better balance between the power of the police unions and neighborhood-based coalitions. The Police Executive Research Forum, made up of the most progressive police executives in the United States, suggests that police chiefs be selected through a nonpartisan professional hiring process and be given a 5-year contract with clearly specified duties as well as procedures for removal for misconduct or incompetence. This ensures that the chief will be sensitive to the community and at the same time able to stand up to improper political influence. Professional hiring and reasonable tenure for the police chief also undermine the code of silence that exists because police officers are afraid that political pressure might cause them to be punished unfairly. A police chief should, regardless of fear of losing his job, support officers who are properly doing their duty. Cops, however, like the voters this year, are not filled with confidence in the integrity of politicians or those who serve at their pleasure. Interestingly, it is the establishment, the politicians and the police unions who are fiercely opposed to the possibility of a professional and independent police chief. Some cities, angry over police brutality, have established citizen review boards, which unfortunately have not improved either police performance or public confidence. I believe review boards strengthen the code of silence and may lower the level of service. Someone recently told me that when visiting New York, he chatted at a party with a policeman who worked in Harlem. "Isn't that dangerous?" he asked. "Not if you mind your own business," the policeman responded. During the early stages of the riot in Los Angeles, we saw the tragic result when cops minded their own business and abandoned neighborhoods and innocent citizens to mobs. Although less dramatic, when cops shirk their day-to-day duties, the result for crime-ridden neighborhoods is equally tragic. Obtaining a balance whereby properly performing cops are confident of support and citizens are confident that they will not be abused by the police is not an easy task, but it is a vital one. A blueprint for change. The future well-being of our country depends upon our ability to improve life for people in poor neighborhoods. As John Donne told us years ago, "Never send to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee." Improvement requires not only changing in policing, but also leadership on the national and local levels, and a commitment from all of us, wherever we live. National action. 1, on a national level, we should declare an end to the war on drugs. Warlike police lead to Rodney King-type tragedies that weaken efforts to instill positive values among minority youngsters. After the Simi Valley jury acquitted the 4 officers, an elderly black minister on a talk show asked a chilling question. The minister said, "All my life I've counseled young men to stay straight and, despite temptations, to respect the law. What do I tell them now?" Secondly, drug funding should be reversed. We should spend 30% for enforcement and 70% for prevention and treatment. Third, we should declare a public health campaign against drugs. The consumption of cigarettes, hard liquor, and high cholesterol foods has lessened without criminal sanctions. An educational program worked. The war on drugs did not. 4, we should immediately decriminalize marijuana, which is far less damaging than alcohol. Decriminalization would allow law enforcement to invest more resources against murders, rapes, robberies, assaults, kidnapping, and child molesting. The results of decriminalization could also provide information as to whether laws affecting other drugs could be safely changed. 5, the federal government should expand programs such as Head Start, the Job Corps, and Small Business Association loans to inner-city businesses. Programs like boot camps and Civilian Conservation Corps should be made available to help teenagers in trouble. 6, family planning programs should be provided to any neighborhood that requests them. 7, the federal government should support experimental neighborhood leadership councils in identifying and solving community problems. Councils should be encouraged to explore ways to develop positive values among young people and to break the cycle of illegitimacy, illiteracy, welfare, and failure. For it is from these neighborhoods that change will come, not from political pronouncements. 8, community policing programs associated with neighborhood leadership councils should be established. 9, FBI training for local police should be expanded to emphasize community policing and the drawbacks of paramilitary policing and prejudice in law enforcement. 10, military assault rifles should be outlawed and the Brady Bill restricting handguns passed independent of any national crime bill. 11, and last, the President should convene a Blue Ribbon Commission to recommend new approaches to crime prevention and control. On a state and local level, 1, state laws should empower neighborhoods to establish gun-free zones in which 5-year mandatory prison sentences would be given to anyone carrying a loaded firearm in the zone without a license. 2, state laws that prevent publicizing information about police disciplinary actions should be repealed. 3, local government should provide opportunities for neighborhood leadership councils to have input into police selection, training, supervision, and community-based policing. 4, Local news media should inform their audience as to how the police disciplinary system and civil service system works. 5, schools should provide mandatory elementary school classes on nonviolent ways to resolve conflict. 6, programs involving businesses in education and neighborhood improvement efforts should be encouraged. In summary, the Blue Line has faltered. Crime and violence have greatly increased, and drug abuse is increasing. Meanwhile, we are bankrupting our city, state, and county governments through increased police, judicial, and correctional costs of the drug war. We have allowed the military style of policing required by a drug law that criminalizes and alienates minority youth, while offering them criminal lifestyle alternatives that mock efforts to motivate underprivileged kids to go to college and live successful lives. We have been both too demanding of our cops and not demanding enough. We ask them to prevent crime and drug use, and yet allow a permanent underclass, and ignore the history of mind-altering substances and black market profits that began after drugs were criminalized in 1914. But we do have the right to demand better service from the White House, the Congress, the State House, City Hall, police chiefs, the police unions, and rank-and-file officers. The beneficiaries will be all of us, including the overwhelming majority of decent cops who risk their lives to protect us. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph McNamara, for those most interesting and informative remarks. And now Joseph Pirelli, past president of the Commonwealth Club of California, will conduct the question and answer period.
Thank you, Jerry Siebert, quarterly chairman. Now, Mr. McNamara, if you would return to the podium, we have many questions for you. The first question is, when is force considered excessive?
When is force considered excessive? When it's in violation of either the law or the police department rules. Police officers are given and should be given the right to defend their own safety or the safety of citizens, or to make arrests. But it must be within the boundaries of what is provided by the law.
Daryl Gates said in his book that the police chief is not given enough freedom to make decisions that politicians are making instead. Do you agree?
Let me confess that I haven't had time to read Daryl Gates' book yet. But I think, as I've mentioned, that it is a varied situation throughout the United States. Some good police chiefs have been dismissed because they've tried to discipline officers who need discipline, and they've lost out because of the power of police unions. In other cases, police officers arrest friends or relatives of powerful politicians, and the chief is dismissed. Most police chiefs serve with absolutely no tenure. They can be dismissed at any time at the pleasure of the appointing authority. At the other extreme is the Los Angeles situation, where the chief has the same civil service protection that every police officer has. I think the happy medium is the one suggested by the Police Research Forum, that a chief would have a contract, would have some degree of protection when he's doing his or her job properly, but the government would also have the means to remove the chief for cause.
This questioner states, police chiefs of large California cities appear to be an endangered species. Would you give us a description of what your approach would be if you had a responsibility for selecting a chief for one of our large cities?
Well, I can think of one chief that should have been an endangered species a long time ago, and the tragic results of that city not having the ability to terminate his employment. But I do think it's an individual case. It's a case of each city having to make the judgment and to have in place the mechanism for controlling the police force. As we said, in a democracy, the police must be under civilian control. There are procedures where you set out criteria for what kind of person should head a police force. It should obviously be someone with a track record, with experience in police management, with good character background, and that appointment, in my view, should always be subject to approval by the mayor or the elected officials of the city.
You have mentioned community-based policing. How broadly is it employed? Where besides San Jose is it used? Can you tell us more of how it works?
Community-based policing is the new buzzword, and one of the dangers I see is people beginning to view it as a panacea, when in fact, in my view, it's more of a philosophy of policing than a specific program, because each city is different. But the idea of community policing is that the officer's function is not simply to enforce the law, but also to work with the community to prevent crime and to improve conditions in the city. In a city like San Jose, which is 176 square miles and only has 1,200 officers to provide 24 hours protection every day of the week, it's very difficult to have a lot of officers assigned just as community policing officers. Other cities where you do have more of a possibility of foot patrol, such as here in San Francisco, do assign a number of officers that do not handle regular calls. They just work in the neighborhoods with schools, with neighborhood groups, with merchants, and with the citizens. But I think a lot depends upon the city, and a lot depends upon the existing resources for the city.
What are some of the new and innovative programs that forward-thinking police departments are using?
The biggest and most dramatic development, as I mentioned, is the idea of community policing, which really is based on research that should have been acted on earlier, that I referred to in my speech. Years ago, research showed that taking a few seconds off the police response time or just engaging in routine automobile patrol did not reduce crime, and it did not make people feel safer. And what it showed is that you can safely take some officers away from the function of just responding to calls and let them interact with the community. Other research showed that your best chances of an arrest and conviction of a criminal occur when the public reports the crime promptly. And so those police officers working with people in the community can play a vital educational role explaining to the public what they should do. We have wonderful 911 systems that are probably underemployed because people are not sure when they should call and when they should not. But I could go on for hours telling you about wonderful people who listened to crime prevention lectures and who dialed 911 and who were responsible for some dangerous criminals being arrested.
How can racist sentiment within the police department be detected and action taken against it?
Racism in the police department can be dealt with when it's overt, when other officers, the best thing for all police departments, and the reason I'm so hesitant to endorse citizen review boards, is the police should police themselves. That's the ideal. And so if you have one police officer who's tempted to do something wrong, whether it's racism or brutality or corruption, looks over at another police officer and says, I better not do that, this officer is going to report me, that's the ideal state. Some things that help are hiring enough minorities so that your department is representative of the city that you serve, and encouraging officers to obey the rules of the department, which require them to report misconduct, and perhaps most importantly of all, of really cracking down on the code of silence when you see it, and severely disciplining any officer that attempts to harass any other officer who does what they should do, report misconduct and tell the truth in an internal investigation.
How accurate is the current depiction in such movies as Boys in the Hood and Grand Canyon of cops who stop and harass blacks and minorities for no apparent reason?
I have another confession. I haven't seen those movies. But I do think one of the serious problems we have in the United States is the perception of minority youngsters that they are in a war with the police and they're being stopped because of their color. This is not the way we're going to change value systems to get those kids to grow up and be successful citizens.
Would you please comment on the problems of arresting looters?
The looters are people who get caught up in the mob excitement and perceive a chance to do a little shopping without stopping on the way out to pay. The difficulty of arresting people during a riot is the numbers. And I was very severely critical of the Los Angeles Police Department leadership, not the rank and file police, because in my view, they suffered the ultimate disgrace of a police department. They yielded the streets to anarchy, to mobs, and to gangsters. And if you don't control those riots within the first 4 or 5 hours, you lost them, and it will take troops to enforce the law. Well, if you early on are showing a strong and firm presence and action by the police, people will not engage in looting. It's only when they perceive that they're going to get away with it. And when they looked at television and saw the total absence of police in rioting areas, it was sort of like a license to steal, an invitation to steal. But I think the looters should be arrested and should be prosecuted just like anyone else who commits that kind of crime.
Could you compare the reactions of the Los Angeles Police Department and the San Francisco Police Department to their respective handling of the rioting, looting situations? Was there an overreaction on one part and an underreaction on the other, or is it more complex than that?
Everything is more complex than that. However, I think clearly we saw evidence that Los Angeles just didn't handle it right. I don't think they were prepared. The police chief was at a political rally letting some lieutenant make decisions that the chief should have been making. Here in San Francisco, the police, as far as I know, took firm and appropriate action. Now, afterwards, the way our system works, people can make complaints. They can have their day in court if they feel they were unfairly arrested by the police. But I think the facts as we see them now are that San Jose and San Francisco did not burn because the police took action, and Los Angeles did because the police were nowhere to be seen in the early hours of the disorder.
What factors do you think contributed to Oakland not rioting after the Rodney King verdict?
I think Oakland probably has a record of not having disorders. And my recollection is that even during the 60s that they did not have the same kind of widespread disorders that other cities had. And the impression that I get is that there is some very strong leadership, as I was very happy to have in San Jose, of people leading minority organizations who were really outstanding and were able to influence the community against potential violence and disorder when a riot was breaking out elsewhere.
This questioner states, police are human too. How can we expect them to be stoned, spit upon, yelled at, and kicked, and then be expected to smile and not lose their tempers?
Well, that's a very good question. We expect them to do that, and we must require them to do that because they're professionals. If they lower themselves to the level of the criminals that they're dealing with, that do those kind of things, then we lose that important difference, the respect for the law that prevents crime. If the public and the young people that we're trying to win over to the right set of values can't tell the good guys from the bad guys, then everything we're saying about obeying the law becomes hypocrisy. The standards are high for policing, and they should be. No one's drafted into the police service. You're not forced to serve. But if you put up your hand and take an oath to obey the Constitution and obey the law, you should obey the law.
Being a cop is a stressful job. What programs are available to help police officers prepare for stressful situations and deal constructively with them?
I think this has been one of the big improvements in policing through the years. When I first started, everyone was supposed to be John Wayne, and nothing was supposed to affect you emotionally, regardless of the terrible things that you saw during the course of your duty. But police departments have gotten better. There's, first of all, psychological screening, which I think keeps a lot of people out of policing who shouldn't be there. And secondly, good departments offer confidential psychological counseling to officers and their families, and also recognize that in shooting situations and unusual emergency situations where there's large loss of life or some terrible things happening, that the police officers have to have the opportunity to have some therapy if they need it, that we just don't say, yeah, so there was a plane crash and you had to carry parts of bodies for 6 hours and identify them and so on, but you go on duty at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning just the same. That's the way it used to be, but I think departments have gotten better, and they are making available programs that and training supervisors to be aware of other workers coming under stress, because you don't want someone out there armed with a gun and a club in an unstable mental condition.
Do you think urban police forces will ever be able to control gang violence?
I don't think the police can control gang violence by themselves any more than they can control drug use and crime. I said we know of some things that don't work, and one of the things I know is about 6 years ago, Chief Darrell Gates said he was going to crush the gangs in Los Angeles and called them dirty little cowards. Now, I don't like gangs either, but I have to admit that they're far from cowardly. They're often foolishly brave. And it sounded like the head of one gang was challenging the other gangs to a fight. We know that that's not the way to do it. The way to do it is through the community organizations and schools and an educational process. The police certainly have a very important role to play and have to be very firm with gangs. You cannot allow violence and the extensive use of firearms and so on. But the real long-term solution to gangs is going to come from the communities, just as the long-term change in values that are producing a lot of unfortunate criminal behavior and bad behavior is also going to come from the community. The police have an important supportive role to play, but that's what it is, a supportive role.
Would you comment on the new ban on automatic weapons and on the general state of gun control in California?
Well, as you know, California does have a law banning some automatic weapons. It's not the ideal law, but it was the first law that was passed shortly after the children were massacred in Stockton. The important thing to remember is the gun that was used in Stockton was not obtained in California, and so there's a need for a national law governing these weapons. They're military-type weapons. We don't know how many of them there are out in the United States, but those are the things that make the future scary. When I talk about Beirut-like uprisings, unlike the 60s when the police faced riots in the 60s, today you have different conditions. You have the presence of these military weapons in great numbers in those areas, and you also have a very large permanent underclass of kids who think nothing of shooting it out with machine guns. And that changes the whole ballgame. The normal police crowd control tactics can't work if someone's firing a machine gun at you. The fire trucks can't put out fires if someone's shooting machine guns. So I think what we need is a very firm national approach that says simply that there's no place in a civilized society for these kind of military weapons. Believe me, no one goes out hunting deer with an AK-47 or a Uzi.
We have time for just one more question. Did the press coverage of the recent events in Los Angeles bear any responsibility for the outbreak and continuation of the looting and rioting? How could it have done things differently?
I think sometimes it gets very common when public officials really screw up to blame the media. And it's true that you sort of don't want to advertise that the police are not in an area of a riot, but on the other hand, maybe you do have to inform the public to stay out of that area, because that's the sickening part about it, is people not knowing that there's a disorder going on who become innocent victims of this. So I'm not prepared to make the media the scapegoat of the Los Angeles riots. I think years of neglect of the underclass there and some very bad policing that went on for years and that came to a head with the Rodney King incident and the verdict were the cause of the riots. The rioters themselves did a terrible thing. I mean, they did more damage to their own people and to their own neighborhoods, and they should not be romanticized in any way. But I don't think we can fault the media. I think there are times when we would want the media to be more restrained in terms of some potential disaster, and sometimes they can be totally without regard for human life, where there are hostages being held and they're transmitting information to the people holding hostages on what the police are doing. It seems to me that that very clearly is a case where the media has relinquished the duties of their own citizenship. But I think in general, it's going to be their call on what they report under the First Amendment. But sometimes I think we could ask them to be more responsible. I don't really have that criticism in the Los Angeles riots because, as I mentioned, I think their publicizing of what went on showed very clear defects in the government's response, in a breakdown of the government's fundamental duty to protect people, and people had a right to know what was going on.
Our thanks to Joseph McNamara, Research Fellow at the Hoover Institution and former Chief of Police of the City of San Jose, for speaking to us today. Please join us again next week when our speaker will be John McGaugh, Director of the U.S. Secret Service, who will discuss what's so secret about the Secret Service. Thank you all for attending today's program. This meeting now stands adjourned.